I should be able to charge for that now. I have special access to the truth about gallbladders.
Will you do family and friends for free? Because if I'm ever having trouble with mine, I might just come down and see you.
I have a Kershaw knife right here.
As long as you sanitize it and you got a bottle of Jim Beam, I think we're good to go.
Bringing you law, gospel, and guns. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a podcast about guns, hunting, competition, self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 120, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, cooksholsters.com. Welcome to the show. Good to have you with us again. Good to be back on schedule. The last couple of weeks have been a little crazy with NRA a couple of weeks ago, and then Grant Cunningham's threat-centered revolver class last weekend. So it's good to be back on track. Happy to have you with us for another week. Thank you for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your day. I really do appreciate that. The average American listens to something like 5 podcasts a week. So I'm honored that you've chosen to listen to us. I hope you'll tell your friends about us. I hope you'll send us some feedback. Visit the feedback page at armedlutheran.us or by stopping by our Facebook page. Drop by iTunes and leave us a review. We would love to hear from you, and I really do appreciate the input. We had a great hangout Thursday night with Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense. It was our monthly member hangout for the Reformation Gun Club. Today, during his segment, you'll be hearing a brief snippet of that interview on the show today. If you'd like to join our next one, if you'd like to hear the full interview with Aaron Israel, plus over 250 other audio clips, visit us and join the Reformation Gun Club over on Patreon. For as little as $2 a month, you get access to hundreds of audio files, lots of exclusive content, including our monthly member hangouts. Like I said, Mia Anstein was our guest in February. Next month, we're planning on having Sergeant Bill with us to talk competition, and then Pastor Bennett will be with us in July, and then in August, we'll be back to Mia. So as a member of the Reformation Gun Club, you can join this community of fans. You can be a part of all this, and you can help support the show and get access to all the great content, Armed Lutheran swag, and member discounts from our partners like Gunbox Gun Safes, Inline Fabrication, easy-to-see targets, Talon gun grips, and more, plus discounts on Aaron Israel's classes. So check it out. Sign up today at gunclub.armedlutheran.us or visit us at patreon.com/armedlutheran. I had planned to talk about Grant Cunningham's threat-centered revolver class in the opening segment of the show this week, but something happened on Friday that has changed plans. A student entered a high school in Santa Fe, Texas, and opened fire, killing 10 and wounding 10 more. He was arrested after surrendering to law enforcement. The anti-gun left, of course, wasted no time. The Parkland kids called for us to do something, and I thought they had all the answers. I mean, what is it we're supposed to do? This shooting, the more we learn about it, and admittedly, we're only a couple of days in here, and we're going to learn a lot more, hopefully. Hopefully it's not like the Las Vegas shooting where we still don't know anything. But what we know at this point destroys a lot of cliches, both on the pro-gun side and the anti-gun side. Well, in response to the Parkland shooting, what did we hear from the anti-gun left? Well, we heard that we need to raise the age of ownership for a rifle to 21. Well, at Santa Fe, the shooter was 17, and he didn't have a rifle. He had a shotgun. He was already prohibited from possessing that firearm without supervision. We heard calls from the left for universal background checks, which is always what we hear, and that doesn't make any sense in this case either. The shooter took the guns from his father. We heard a call for a ban on high-capacity magazines. In this case, the shooter, in addition to a shotgun, which generally only has, I'd say, I don't know what kind of a shotgun he had, but 5 to 7 rounds tops, he also had a 6-round revolver, or it might have been a 5-round revolver. Either way, 5 to 6 rounds in a revolver, not a semi-automatic pistol. He didn't have an assault weapon. So the calls that we heard after Parkland for banning assault weapons, again, would have no effect. USA Today, proving again that they are perhaps the stupidest publication on the face of the planet, ran a headline suggesting that this was a new kind of shooting because the shooter used less lethal weapons. I guess there's this lethality scale that I wasn't aware of. Apparently AR-15 is at the top, like it'll blow holes through tanks, the AR-15. It's the most powerful weapon you can possibly get your hands on. And then at the other end, you've got less lethal, like shotguns, and then even less lethaler than that is the revolver. And so I guess the kids that were killed at Parkland are more dead than the ones that were killed in Santa Fe, Texas. On our side, we heard a call for armed school resource officers, especially after seeing the one that we had at Parkland chicken out, drive off, and retire and wait and let the shooting take place, did nothing to stop it, and has now retired to a $96,000 a year pension. But again, that cliche went down the toilet because the school resource officer at Santa Fe was actually shot, as I understand it. The benefits of so-called gun violence protection orders and red flag protection orders have been touted in recent weeks. And this kid exhibited no red flags, aside from liking guns and video games and occasionally wearing boots and trench coats to school, which in Texas is kind of weird, but it's not exactly the kind of thing that's illegal. None of the things that he was interested in are necessarily a sign that a person is violent. We heard talk of how we need to get more church involved. We need to get more God involved in school. Remember the episode we did in our segment of Clinging to God and Guns, where we had this guy, I think it was from the American Family Association, who said that we need more God and more guns in our schools. Well, this kid was actually active in his church. So what do we take from all this? As we've said on this show repeatedly, there's no easy solution. There's no simple fix, which is why the left doesn't want to hear what we have to say. They think that we can fix these things just by passing a law. Everything will be better. We have to understand evil exists, and we waste our time focusing on tools instead of accepting the fact and trying to solve the problem. Writing over at National Review, David French posted an article, I think it was on Saturday, suggesting that the best explanation for school shootings is probably the one that's least comforting. He's referring to an article in 2015 from Malcolm Gladwell, and that article relied on the work of a Stanford sociologist named Mark Granovetter. And in this article, French, referring to these two previous sources, says that the mistake that we make is looking at these shootings in isolation. We look at each one and try to figure out the whys of each one. But we really need to be looking at all of them as a trend, going all the way back to Columbine. The suggestion, the idea here is that once a potential shooter sees somebody else do it, they're more inclined to do it themselves. And so you get the copycat effect. I think it was Granovetter who wrote that it's sort of like a riot. You see, there's a bunch of people who would like to break stuff and cause mayhem, but they're not really comfortable until they see somebody else do it. And then somebody breaks a window, and the guy whose threshold for, crossing that line and becoming a rioter, some of those people join in. And there'll be others who will hold back until they see more people do it. And at some point, everybody's joining in. Everybody who has that inclination, when they see everybody around them looting and breaking windows and rioting, they're okay with joining in themselves. The suggestion is that we're seeing this same sort of trend in mass shootings. 8 of the 12 shootings that followed Columbine were inspired by Columbine. Of the 11 shootings that followed Columbine outside the U.S., 6 of those were based on Columbine. Of the 11 shootings that followed Columbine, those that were planned but were thwarted by law enforcement, all of them were inspired by Columbine. Columbine set the script that others followed. Each school shooting, each school shooter creates a script and a motive for future shooters. And as Gladwell wrote in his 2015 piece, the problem is not that we have an endless supply of deeply disturbed men willing to contemplate mass murder. The problem now is that we have young men who no longer need to be deeply disturbed to do it. The left wants action. They want laws. They think that we got to do something. And they think that when we oppose the something that they want, if we oppose gun control, we must want to do nothing. But the fact is that we all want it to stop. So how do we stop it? How do we help? Number one, stop publicizing killers. No more names, no more photos in print, in television, on the internet, no more. The Santa Fe shooter said that he didn't shoot the kids he liked because he wanted his story to get out. These killers crave attention, and their actions incite others. So we're just giving them free publicity every time this happens. And the cycle repeats itself over and over and over again. These guys, the last two, attempted to escape. Or in the case of the most recent one, he surrendered. Unlike previous shooters, unlike Columbine, they didn't go in looking to die. They went in looking to make a name for themselves. And that's got to stop. Number two, mass murder ought to be automatic death penalty. If you're convicted of mass murder, it ought to be hanging or the firing squad. Okay? And it should be public. Cesar Beccaria, back in the 18th century, he wrote a book about crime and punishment, and he basically said for punishment to have any deterrent effect, it's got to be swift, it's got to be certain, and it's got to be public. These kids, these killers, they go into the criminal justice system, they disappear. We hear about them in a headline. Oh, he passed away. Oh, he failed an appeal. No more news about him until the day that we see him swinging and struggling from the end of a rope or filled full of holes by a firing squad. Period. 3, we need to make parents, and this is going to rub some of you in the pro-gun side wrong, but we need to make parents liable for failing to secure their firearms. I don't know whether it should be criminally or civilly. If you can be held responsible because your dogs hurt somebody, you can be held and should be held responsible because you didn't secure your guns. Firearms ownership comes with it a great responsibility. I'm not trying to quote Spider-Man here, but you have a responsibility to make sure that the firearms you own don't fall into the hands of people who shouldn't have them. Now, I'm not talking about in the case of, obviously, the Newtown shooter's mom. You can't really hold her responsible because her son killed her and then took the guns. But in this case, how hard was it for this 17-year-old to get his hands on those two guns? When we find out, I bet we'll be surprised to find out that those guns really weren't very secure. Or if they were, the kid had access to them. Easy access. We've got to have some sense of responsibility. Now, these are in no particular order of importance. So these are just some things I jotted down. 4th on my list, we've got to harden our schools. Schools are way too easy for people to get into. Every school that my children have attended, and they're all public schools, you can walk in the front door and they will buzz you in, and then it's free reign. If they don't let you pass that buzzed-in door at the foyer, how are they going to stop you? If you've got a shotgun and you can blow the hinges off, or you can blow the door lock off, or you can blow holes through the glass. We need to harden our schools. That means school resource officers. It means metal detectors or wands. It means more difficult doors for people to get into, less opportunities or areas of entry. We need to look at our schools, school by school, system by system, state by state, and figure out how do we harden those schools so that they're not soft targets. 5th, we need to allow citizens who can legally carry to exercise their rights. The idea that you can't carry on school grounds or that we can't arm teachers is nuts. We need to trust that citizens, good people with a gun, can make a difference. 6th, enforce the laws we've got on the books. How often do we hear about people who are arrested and they've got a gun charge and they had previous gun charges and then those charges are pled away or they're dismissed. They plead to something lesser and the gun charges are let go. That's got to stop. We can't keep focusing on law-abiding citizens while we do nothing about the criminals who continue to violate the laws we already have. This last one may be a little controversial, but it's something we need to consider. We need to change the laws about juvenile criminal records and their mental health records. Think of it like this. You got a deeply disturbed kid who is in the juvenile justice system. He's got a mental health history. He's got something wrong with him. He's committed violent crimes as a minor. As soon as he becomes an adult, most states expunge those records and completely destroy them. That kid never goes into the NICS system, and all of his past history disappears. And suddenly, he's a law-abiding citizen. And that kid, just because he had another birthday, can walk into a gun store and buy a gun. Bingo, there's a problem. Now, I'm not suggesting that we completely change the system on juvenile records, because let's face it, kids make mistakes and they get caught up and do stuff that they shouldn't, and they shouldn't be held against them for the rest of their lives. But there are some kids that really shouldn't have their slate cleaned. Those kids we need to keep track of. So how we do this, what the criterion is, how we protect their due process rights, all of that stuff, figure it out. But we need to change the way we do this, because we can't have people who are completely nutso as a kid suddenly become law-abiding, and just because they turned another year older. Something about that has to change. I have not suggested gun control, and I have no interest in doing so because I don't support gun control, and I don't think that gun control will have any effect whatsoever on these shootings. But that doesn't mean that we should do nothing. Even if we were to do all 7 of these things on my list, none of these things is going to guarantee that we don't have another shooting, because evil people will find a way. No matter how many laws we put in place, no matter how many protections we think we're going to put in place, we're going to find people who are nuts and who are dangerous and who will find a way to hurt other people. It's the nature of evil. But if we truly want these tragedies to stop, if we want to minimize them, if we want to make it harder for these deranged killers to hurt other people, we've got to reject our preconceived notions on both sides of the debate. The notion that background checks are going to save lives, the notion that gun bans or magazine bans or age restrictions will have any effect. We need to reject the good guy with a gun mentality. That cliche needs to die. A good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy with a gun. But that doesn't mean that if you don't have a gun, you can't do something to stop somebody. Look at the guy in the Waffle House incident recently. He didn't have a gun. He wasn't even a gun guy. But he saw an opportunity and he took it, and he disarmed the shooter. We need to be teaching our kids not to go hide and wait for the shooter to pass us by. We need to teach evade, barricade, and most importantly, fight. But most importantly, of all these things that I've suggested that we need to do, we need to pray. Now, the anti-gun left will suggest that they'll taunt us for extending our thoughts and prayers, saying, what good did prayers do in Santa Fe, Texas? What good did prayers do in Parkland, Florida? What good did the prayers of those people in the church do in Sutherland Springs? And they're right. Those prayers didn't stop the shooters. But that's not why we're praying. In the aftermath of these terrible tragedies, we're praying for comfort. We're praying for guidance. We're praying for wisdom. We pray that our politicians stop playing political football in the blood of the victims of these tragedies and come up with solutions that actually work. That's what we pray for. From everybody here at Armed Lutheran Radio, we're praying for the people of Santa Fe, Texas, just as we pray and continue to pray for the people in Parkland, Florida, and Newtown, and Aurora, Charleston, Sutherland Springs. We pray for the victims. We pray for their families, for their friends, for the teachers, for the counselors, even for the killers, and for their families. We pray for our law enforcement officers, for our first responders. We pray for swift justice and an end to our earthly suffering. We pray for the souls of the fallen, whom we pray have gone on to their heavenly reward. We'll be back with more right after this. As many of you know, you'll likely have to win 2 fights if you have to use your gun in self-defense. The first fight is the gunfight itself. The second is the fight to clear your good name through the legal system. Even if you do everything right, you can still be prosecuted, which can cost you tens of thousands of dollars. Armed Lutheran Radio is proud to partner with the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, and while they can't completely take away that worry, they can give you the peace of mind knowing that you've got the financial and legal assistance you need to win this new fight. Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network can help. Go to my website, armedlutheranradio.us, look for the coupon code on the right-hand side in the sidebar, and sign up for Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network protection and save $25 off your first year of membership at armedcitizensnetwork.org. Join me, Pastor Bennett, Paul Lathrop, and thousands of American gun owners who trust Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. armedcitizensnetwork.org.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
One more question about philosophy and approach, and this is a Grant Cunningham question that he brought up in his class, and I thought it was a really good one. Talk about in the time that you've been teaching. Name one thing or two things that you've changed your mind about as an instructor over the years. Is there something that you teach now that you didn't teach before because you've changed your mind about something, or vice versa? Is there something that you no longer teach that you used to think was important?
Oh man, I tell you what, when I started out teaching, when I was initially teaching license to carry, I was a walking Texas stereotype of a gun owner. So, I mean, I was all the things that I tell people not to be now. Like I had a 3-inch 1911 that I carried, cocked and locked inside the waistband, 45, probably one of the worst defensive pistols you can choose, because it's 2018 and not 1912, right? So it's, but I was that guy. I carried that, and then I focused all my time and energy on, standing in front of static targets and shooting at them. So there was that whole evolution. But since I've been teaching what I've been teaching, some of the things that I've kind of changed my mind about, like I used to really super emphasize the way that I like to teach reloads, right? Mm-hmm. So, I teach people to stay focused on the target, bring the gun back into the ready position, and reload while looking at the target and using the overhand rack method to get the slide forward. And I used to really harp on that. And if I had somebody who had a competition background and used the slide catch and kind of did it up in their workspace, quote unquote, looking at the gun and all that, I used to get after them real hard, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing what we know, I was like, well, that doesn't really make sense when I just talked about the plausibility principle, and we know that reloads are probably not likely to happen. So why am I spending so much time correcting this guy's reload when he's getting the gun reloaded just to, maybe save him a couple of seconds? Because it's probably still going to work fine, and it's not worth me, taking all this time out of class to really emphasize something that I just said is not an essential skill, right? So now I'm going to show people how to reload, and I'm going to suggest that they do it the way that I do it. But if they're getting the gun reloaded and it's working, I don't spend as much time on that. So that's one thing, is I just don't think it really is as important as I was making it before, just to be dogmatic, one way or the other. So I think it works both ways, and I think my way is more efficient. But if you get a lot of practice and you spend a lot of time doing it the competition way, that can be just as good if you spend a lot of time working on it. The other thing I would say is on the lateral movement, we teach people to get off the X. You probably heard that terminology before. So as you're getting the gun into the fight, you're moving rapidly, one body width left or right, as you're getting the gun into a fully extended shooting position. And what I would see people doing, and we teach them to do that when they're reloading too, anytime that they're not, actively shooting or searching and assessing, that they're moving. And what you'd end up with is a whole bunch of people bouncing around the range, right? And it turns out that the only lateral movement is only useful for a split second, and that split second is kind of like when Zeke Elliott for the Cowboys jukes the guy that's trying to tackle him, right? It's that split second start-stop movement that causes the attacker to have to reevaluate and refocus himself, and potentially buys you that extra split second to get into the fight, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't do you any good to stand there bouncing around the range the whole time you're reloading, right? So you do that initial explosive movement, and that's as much as it's going to be good for. And after you do that, just get the gun reloaded and get back in the fight. So I don't focus so much on having people move the whole time that they're doing a reload or anything like that, because I think it becomes pretty useless after about the first split second. And some people, they just don't have the athleticism to move offline in a way that would make a difference, right? I had a guy in my class a couple weeks ago who just, he's a little bit older. He's got arthritis, and his knees and his hips just won't move rapidly. And so his lateral movement was pretty useless. I mean, it wasn't going to have any effect on anybody who's got, properly functioning pupils,
Right.
So I was like, okay, for you, I don't want you to hurt yourself, because I'm afraid you're going to, blow your knee out trying to do this. And B, you move so slow that it's better off for you just to stand still and get the gun out faster, So,
right. Yeah,
Yes.
and that moving while trying to do a reload is adds a level of difficulty to what should be a fairly simple maneuver. You're
Yep.
already stressed because you're in a self-defense situation and you're trying to reload the gun. Now you throw in the fact that you're trying to move laterally at the same time.
And Grant's, I think, written a blog about it, and he's right in saying that it's not hard to teach people to move; it's hard to teach them when to stop moving. And so that's the thing that I've started to emphasize. But basically, I mean, there's other things I could list out, but basically, it's getting away from having a doctrine that I agree with, a philosophy that I agree with, but not a dogma. Like I don't have things that I have to teach a certain way. It depends on the student, and it depends on what their strengths and weaknesses are and what's going to work best for their context, as opposed to approaching, okay, I have to teach X, Y, and Z at this time of the day. And when you start out teaching classes, you have a tendency to fall into that. I'm teaching a curriculum when really you ought to be focusing on what the student needs and using that curriculum as a guide, but really focusing on where they're developing and what stage they're at that point in the day. So it all relates to just being a better teacher is what I've changed on. So
Yep.
Aaron Israel is a Personal Defense Network contributor and owner of Fundamental Defense. You can find out more and sign up for any of Aaron's classes at fundamentaldefense.com.
Hey, if you're like me, you like shopping at gun shows. No pressure from sales staff, no need to bother them to ask to look at stuff. You just pick stuff up and dry fire it and look at it and hold it. Imagine if you could get that experience at your local gun store, where you don't need to bother anybody. You don't have to ask people for help if you don't need it. You don't have salespeople hovering over your shoulders. Well, this is what it's like when you shop at G4G Guns. Cassie and Patrick Coburn are the owners, and you've heard them on the program before. They are absolutely awesome people, and they'll help you find exactly the right gear for you. But there's no sales pressure. You just browse the store, you pick up and hold anything that you want to look at without asking permission, just like at the gun show. And once you've found the gun you want, or if you actually do need assistance, Patrick and Cassie are there to help. It's the best of both worlds, gun shop and gun show, in one place. It really is the best. G4G Guns. They're located at 2035 Central Circle, Suite 108 in McKinney, Texas. They're open Mondays from 1 to 6, Tuesday through Thursday 11 to 7, and on the weekends you'll find them at a gun show near you. Or check them out online at G4G Guns. That's G, the number 4, G, guns.com. G4G Guns, the gallery for great guns. G4GGuns.com.
Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstein.
Hey everybody, I'm here with Tom Keogh from Project Appleseed, and this is a program that I've heard about for years, and it's something that you can get involved in. Tom, would you mind telling our listeners a little more about the program?
Sure. Well, Project Appleseed is a national nonprofit foundation, and we teach two things at our weekend boot camps. One is the finest program of field riflery that you'll find anywhere in the U.S. Our instructors have a minimum of 160 hours of hands-on training to become instructors, and they have to be rifle experts before they can get into the program. So they're extremely well trained. But the second thing that we'll teach you is the true history of the founding of the United States, all about Lexington and Concord in April 1775, the shot heard around the world, and why and how 15,000 Americans turned out to defend their own liberty.
Yes.
And it's a wonderful story, and it goes to the essence of what it means to be an American and why it's your heritage to be a rifleman.
Right. So you're teaching more than just firearms safety and handling marksmanship. You're also teaching history.
Exactly. And in a sense, the marksmanship is actually the hook to get people in to hear that story, because what we're really trying to do is to awaken sleeping Americans.
Yes.
It's your heritage to be a rifleman, but liberty is your heritage as well. And your forefathers sacrificed their lives, their honors, and their sacred fortunes to win liberty for their descendants. And unfortunately today, that's something that a whole lot of us don't really value that much.
Right.
And so one of the things that we try to do is inspire people. We want them to get off the couch, to become part of their communities, to take an active role in keeping liberty alive in the hearts and minds of their neighbors and their families.
That's awesome. That's even more than I knew about Project Appleseed, so I've explained it to people before, so I'm really glad I stopped to ask you because I didn't know that you taught that part of it. I honestly thought it was more marksmanship, shooting, targets, and so forth.
Well, we certainly are about shooting. Our weekend boot camps are excellent ways to learn how to shoot your rifle better. Our typical cost is $60 for 2 days of instruction, which is the best buy on the market. And typically those courses are scaled to 25 yards. But it's as if you're shooting at 100, 200, 300, and 400 yards. Now we do full distance shoots as well, but it's hard to find 400-yard ranges. So this brings that advanced marksmanship training into much more accessible areas because there's very few long-distance ranges outside of rural areas.
Right. So are participants bringing their own firearms and ammunition and so they can use something they're comfortable with, or are they using yours?
We'll teach you how to use your rifle.
Perfect.
And we get people who certainly bring hopped-up AR-15s with high-power sights and high-speed, low-drag gear.
Yeah.
But the goal is to teach people how to be able to hit a 20-inch target at 400 yards with a rack-grade rifle.
Yeah.
The program was originally done mostly with Garand rifles from the CMP. Today we see lots of 22s, we see lots of AR-15s, and we still see some Garands coming out on the course. But, originally we focused on what we call the hairy-legged old men. The guys who were military veterans who were into old military rifles. They had Garands or SKSs in their closet, but they weren't really keen on the use of them. And so the instruction was originally focused about that. Today we get soccer moms, we get folks from about 8 years old all the way up to 80 years old. And we still do special training for military units when we can, go on the Army bases and help folks get prepared to go out and fight in the sandbox. But we have a much wider base today. We've trained about 100,000 Americans.
That's outstanding. And so how long has the program been around?
About 12 years now.
12 years. And first, you said you're a nonprofit. For somebody who wanted to support you, how would they find you and look you up, and how could they support you?
Well, we have a website. It's www.appleseedinfo.org.
Okay.
And there's everything on there about us, the program, how you can contribute to our mission. And that's really what we need, what we're trying to do.
The calendar's there?
The calendar's there. You can look up and find a shoot in your area. We do shoots in all 50 states. We've done them in Hawaii and Alaska. We've got shoots all over the great state of Texas here.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time, and I appreciate all the information.
It's nice to meet you.
For our listeners, I'll include a link in the show notes for you, and you can check out Project Appleseed online. Thanks. Have a great day.
You can read more from Mia and watch her YouTube videos at miaanstein.com.
It's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. I'm Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. When someone says we don't need that kind of gun, remind them the Founding Fathers determined what rights our Constitution should protect. There's a world of difference between rights and needs. It is not the function of government to tell us what we need or what we don't. Certainly no one needs an assault rifle or a Saturday Night Special, or for that matter, no one needs a Corvette with a high-capacity horsepower engine capable of speeds to 150 miles per hour. But in the hands of honest, responsible individuals, we have the right of choice. We have the right to read books others don't like. We have the right to listen to any radio program we choose. We have the right to dress the way we want to. We also have the right to own firearms of our choice. So the next time someone tells you you don't need something, tell them it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. Join the Second Amendment Foundation today so that this message and our Bill of Rights might live. Call 425-454-7012. That's 425-454-7012.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Sylvia.
Hey everybody, I'm Sergeant Bill. This is your Ballistic Minute. So usually this is where I give an idea for a topic for the show, where I'm going to talk about something that's going to help you in your shooting. Something that should help you in your shooting is a program the government started a long time ago called the CMP, or the Civilian Marksmanship Program. Unfortunately, the CMP has lost its way, and they no longer care about civilians trying to have actual marksmanship skills by supplying them with reissued old military hardware, small arms, to practice those skills. They still have guns for sale, and they have an upcoming 1911 sale from tens of thousands of 1911s that they're supposedly selling, 8,000 this first year. And like I said, the CMP has lost their way. So these guns are supposed to be old military surplus that they're supposed to sell to civilians at a reduced price, something they can afford so that they can have a firearm to practice with. They have a whole bunch of hurdles you have to go through to even get in the pool of people that they're going to do a random draw to get these guns. There are several different grades of the guns. There's going to be an auction of the most prized guns. There's rack grade, there's field grade, and service grade. Now, the rack grade or bottom level of gun that they have that they're going to be selling is going to be $850. Yeah, I said $850 for a probably 50-year-old 1911 military surplus issue. It gets better. I'm going to read you exactly what they describe as the rack grade guns. The pistols will exhibit rust and extreme wear on exterior and friction surfaces. The grips may be incomplete and exhibit cracks. The pistol requires minor work to return to issuable condition. Issuable condition. That means to actually work. Really? Selling a gun for $850 that doesn't even work? Especially in 1911, when you can go to Rock Island Arms or Springfield Armory or hell, even some of the low-end Colts you can get for that. And these aren't the tricked out, fitted frames, fitted barrels, better slides. These are the old A1 original John Browning design 1911s in that kind of condition for $850. So I think you're probably seeing why I say the CMP has lost their way. Even at half of this price, this gun is still probably not even worth it. I was planning on getting one for myself, and I was also planning on trying to get one for my wife. No longer. The CMP is not going to get any of my money or any of my business. I suggest every one of the listeners that is concerned about this program do what I'm doing and boycott the CMP. Write them a letter, write them an email, call them, and let them know that this program was designed initially and still should be for the average man to have a gun that he can use and practice with and maintain marksmanship skills, whether it be competition or defensive or whatever it may be. There's no reason why a 50-plus-year-old 1911 in non-issuable condition should be more than a brand new, somewhat factory custom gun that you can get from about 15 different makers. This is ridiculous. I'm Sergeant Bill. This is your Ballistic Minute.
Sergeant Bill Sylvia is a veteran of the Dallas Police Department and masterclass competitive shooter. You can watch Sergeant Bill's shooting videos at armedlutheran.us/Sergeant Bill.
Hey, if you need a good holster, let me take a minute to tell you about my good friends at Cook's Holsters. If you've got a need for a holster for a carry gun, for competition, for a day at the range, check out Cook's Holsters at cooksholsters.com. They're American-made Kydex holsters, custom-made for your specific firearm with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee. And trust me, they stand by that guarantee. I know because I've seen it in action. Great people. You've heard Bob Cook on the podcast a couple of times over the last couple of years. He usually comes in at the end of the year on our Christmas show and talks about what's new for the coming year. He makes a fantastic product, and you will not be disappointed. Trust me, I have been using their holsters for years. I found them when I started doing reviews of holsters back when, in the pre-podcast days, back when I was blogging, and I love the product, and I trust it with my own life. You should give them a shot as well. Check them out at cooksholsters.com. Use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and get 10% off your order. Check them out, cooksholsters.com today.
Up next, we're clinging to God and guns with Pastor John Bennett.
Welcome back to another episode of Clinging to God and Guns, where we dissect and debunk and analyze articles and videos that try to use Scripture to push a position in the gun rights debate. We're joined, as always, by our good friend, Pastor John Bennett. Pastor, welcome back.
Thank you, Lloyd. Ready for another episode of using the Scriptures to lie and deceive.
Well, this week's article comes to us from pathos.com, and it was published back in February of this year, 2018. It's entitled The Gun Debate, Telling the Difference Between a Mob and a Community. It's written by the Reverend Adam Erickson, who is the education director for the Raven Foundation. He's the pastor at Clackamas United Church of Christ in Oregon, and you may know that name because it was at the Clackamas Mall some years ago that concealed carry permit holder Nick Melly confronted a mass shooter in the mall and forced him to commit suicide instead of continuing on his rampage.
No, there's no way that ever happened. That was just some stunt the NRA pulled to push.
Reverend Erickson enjoys writing for Sojourners and Pathos, two cesspools of modern heresy that we've dug into before. And if you go to his website, you'll see pictures of him with a rainbow gay pride stole as he preaches. So that gives you an idea of what we're getting into here today.
Yippee! So
here we go. Students at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School are rising up as new leaders. They refuse to respond to the tragedy at their high school with despair and are instead taking action. They have what theologian James Allison calls the intelligence of the victim. They have special access to the truth about violence and, in particular, gun violence. I can't get any further. This is going to be a really long one because every paragraph is just chock full of stupid. Right off the bat, hiding in a closet during a school shooting doesn't give you access to the truth about gun violence.
And these aren't leaders. I mean, they're being propped up by Bloomberg and Associates as useful idiots, and that's it.
Yep, exactly right. I mean, and this idea that just because you're in proximity to some terrible event somehow makes you an expert on it, it's just insane. I mean, it's like saying, hey, I was hiding in a cellar during a tornado, so I know all about meteorology.
Lloyd, you've had gallbladder surgery, so you should know all about that, right?
I should be able to charge for that now. I have special access to the truth about gallbladders.
Well, you do family and friends for free, because if I'm ever having trouble with mine, I might just come down and see you.
I have a Kershaw knife right here.
As long as you sanitize it and you got a bottle of Jim Beam, I think we're good to go.
There we go.
But yeah, this idea that just because you're a quote unquote victim makes you an expert it's just utter stupidity.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was abused as a child. It doesn't make me an expert on child abuse. I'm not suddenly equipped to go into any domestic situation and diffuse a violent scenario.
Right. Yep. The logical fallacies are strong with this one.
Yes. And it's interesting, those, because of all the victims, and I'm talking about the legitimate victims, the people who actually got shot at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, that there's one victim that the media is almost completely ignoring by this point, and that's Anthony Borges, because as soon as he was released from the hospital and he was talking out, he was pointing out the failures of law enforcement.
Exactly.
And saying this wasn't a gun control issue. And good luck trying to find any media outlet that reported that, because there was only one isolated story that I could find where they actually were still reporting that he was speaking out about how this wasn't a failure about gun control, but of law enforcement.
Yeah, but that doesn't fit the narrative.
That's right.
So on with our, we get two more sentences and then it's just, but the students haven't taken on a victim mentality. Their message isn't about revenge, but about society fulfilling a promise to protect and care for our children.
They have taken on a victim mentality.
I know that's not even close to being true. Their message for right out the gate was profanity-laced tirades against the NRA.
Right. It's, we're victims, so you have to listen to us because that makes us the experts.
Sadly, many are trying to silence the voice of these students, claiming that they are paid actors and working for the FBI. The students are naming the darkness in the world, and the darkness is trying to silence them. But their truth will not be silenced.
What darkness are they naming?
Oh, gee whiz. I mean, now I agree with the whole paid actor conspiracy theory thing is just brickbat stupid, but it's pointless to try to discredit the Parkland kids because they're walking and talking jokes. I mean, yes. David Hogg just discredits himself every time he tweets something or opens his mouth.
But their truth will not be silenced. In order for the truth to be silenced, they first have to be speaking the truth.
Right. They haven't said anything truthful since the beginning.
No. I mean, and obviously they can't be paid actors because if they were, they probably would have been able to follow a script that provided a better argument than the ones that they're spouting.
Yep. All right, next our author is going to refer to somebody named Rene Girard. And if you peruse this guy's blog, he has a major man crush on Rene Girard because he quotes him in almost every post. It's like he even he refers to him without actually explaining who he is. So if you read this guy's stuff regularly, you're supposed to know who this Rene Girard guy is.
Well, good lefties are always in love with, French socialists.
Right. Well, Girard was apparently a French historian and a philosopher who wrote about something called mimetic theory, the mimetic theory of desire. Essentially, our desires are simply borrowed from other people. I mean, we call this covetousness. We just don't come up with some stupid weird name for it, so we sound like a smart egghead.
Well, we should have come up with some weird name for it because I'm sure you could have made a lot of money off of that.
Yeah. According to Girard, every conflict comes from this mimetic desire to have what other people have or have what we don't have. And there's some truth to this idea. I've heard somebody, I think it was Pastor Brian Wolfmueller, who was talking about, well, all of our sin starts with the 9th and 10th commandments. You start with coveting and then everything else, comes from that. You want somebody else's wife, so then you break the 8th commandment to maybe lie, or you commit adultery, or you kill somebody to have that person, we hear those stories about how two people who are in an affair will conspire to kill the wife or the husband, that kind of thing.
Yep.
So all of our sin sort of flows from this sinful desire for things that we don't have, and God didn't intend us to have.
Unless you're just bat poop crazy and, as was the case with the Parkland shooter.
Right, exactly. Rene Girard states that in a scapegoating situation, the group is trying to expel its internal violence out onto a victim, blaming the victim for the discord in the community. Guns are symbols of this internal violence that is now being projected onto high school students.
That doesn't even make sense.
Not even close to what... I mean, for a guy who blogs about the wisdom of mimetic theory, that's not even a good application of it.
I was going to say that the group that is expelling its internal violence out onto the victim, if you were to use his language here, then the proper application would be the violence that is being projected onto the pro-gun community.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Because he's saying guns are a symbol of this internal violence that is now being projected onto high school students. If they're trying to expel that internal violence by blaming a victim, they're blaming the NRA and lawful gun owners.
Yes, this is completely backwards. Girard talked about, I did as much reading on this as I could stand, but he basically defined this, what he called the scapegoat mechanism. The idea that, okay, so this rivalry, this mimetic rivalry causes conflict in the community. So, like I said, you think of this as covetousness, one group wanting what another group's got, and then that covetousness causes conflict. And then to end the conflict, some person or some group is singled out as the cause, and that group is then expelled or killed. That's the scapegoat mechanism. If you can't see how that's being applied to gun owners and NRA members, and you think it's being applied to the Parkland kids, there's something seriously wrong with you.
Remember how I was talking about mental illness earlier?
That's right. That's just mind-blowing because the guy writes so much about Girard and then gets it completely wrong.
It's like if you're trying to make an argument and then you use the absolute best case against your argument as your evidence.
Right. And it gets worse. We do need to ban AR-15 rifles and other military assault rifles that are only meant to kill as many people in as little time as possible. But the underlying issue is a culture of violence that infects U.S. culture. We have
military assault rifles are already banned for private ownership.
I was going to say he's right about the culture of violence, but then he goes on to blame the AR-15, which is not a military assault rifle.
No, it's a modern sporting rifle.
He probably thinks AR stands for assault rifle.
Yeah, probably.
And then he says, we have stricter regulations for driving a car than we do for using a gun. This needs to change.
False.
Dumb. The car regulation argument is so sophomoric. It's not even worth responding to.
As many times as I've bought a vehicle, I don't ever once remember filling out a Form 4473.
Not even once.
Here's another thing, too, is that when it comes to firearm manufacturers versus automobile manufacturers, that so often we see that the firearm manufacturers are often far more responsible in fixing issues than car manufacturers.
Yeah.
Sometimes it takes dozens of people being injured or dying for a car manufacturer to issue a recall. Whereas, last time I checked with the SIG 320 recall, I don't think anyone was actually injured. But just because it was a potential defect because derps were drop testing their P320s,
right?
They expend millions of dollars to fix the issue.
And just as an aside, cars aren't protected by the Constitution, but that's an argument for another day. Children are pervasively scapegoated by our culture because adults run things according to what adults value. Children and adults need different types of environments. What?
This word scapegoat, it reminds me of that line from The Princess Bride. You keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
Exactly. We aren't keeping our children safe in schools or when they are walking to and from school. Children from Parkland, Florida to Syria are victims of the adult desire to get even. Until we begin to structure our decision process around what children need as well as what adults need, we're going to be stuck in these situations.
I have no idea what any of that means.
Well, if you run the world based on what kids value, you'll be eating cookies for breakfast and ice cream for lunch and Skittles for dinner.
But this thing...
I mean, that's what kids value, children value. You'd never brush your teeth or go to the dentist or the doctor. You wouldn't have a job.
The very first sentence, though, children are pervasively scapegoated by our culture because adults run things according to what adults value.
That's not what scapegoated means.
Right. Scapegoating means blaming an individual or sometimes a group of individuals for a problem that isn't their fault. So we're blaming the children for gun violence?
Well, because we're not listening to the kids, you see. We're blaming them for speaking up. That's what he's trying to say there, I think.
And you know what? Like you were saying earlier about, the world being fed with Skittles. Yes, our culture is run by adults according to what adults value because kids aren't capable of knowing what's best for them in most situations.
This is like that pink-haired fruit that said that we need to ask babies for consent before changing them. Adults don't run things according to what children value because, like you said, they're children.
My 5-year-old son, if I let him, he would eat candy all day long until he puked or weighed 300 pounds. And you know what? Many of the problems in this society are a consequence of parents letting their kid do whatever their kid wants instead of sitting them down and saying, this is what's best for you, and damn it, you're going to do it.
Very true. Oh, in too many cases, we see kids coddled and treated like they're special instead of treating them like what they are, children.
Yes. Your wife is an educator, correct?
Mm-hmm.
My wife is an educator, and they see this all the time. that many of the behavioral problems that happen in the classroom are because of a total lack of discipline in the home.
Yes. Yeah.
But we're supposed to let the world be run the way kids want it to be run.
This is the same line of reasoning that suggests that maybe we need to let 16-year-olds vote. You know, this is the same think. Oh, they're so fresh and young and new, and they have this special understanding of the truth, and we need to let them vote. It's like, no, they don't have any idea what they're talking about.
It's the ideological equivalent of letting the inmates run the asylum.
Yes.
Not that kids are crazy.
Some of them are.
But yes, some of them are. But kids often are not the best judges of what they need and what they don't need.
Watch any YouTube videos of kids jumping off stuff and you'll know that's true.
Or eating Tide Pods or snorting condoms.
Yes, exactly right. Yes, how could I forget? A priest became the principal of a school for troubled teens who were kicked out of their high schools for bad behavior, like Trayvon Martin.
Shh, we're not supposed to say that.
He decided that he would intentionally create a culture that welcomed students at the school. For example, every morning he greeted the student and talked with them as they entered his school. In his decades of being a teacher and administrator, he never felt threatened by any student, largely because he and others created a culture of hospitality at the school. Now, he doesn't mention who this is and doesn't cite any examples, so this could just be, a fever dream for all we know. But
let's give him the benefit of the doubt, though, and assume that this is a true story. In many ways, this goes hand in hand with the argument that the pro-gun folks have been using, that so much of this violence that we see is a consequence of how we are treating children. Mm-hmm. That if we just take the time to actually care about them, to be involved in their lives, that maybe fewer of these things will happen.
Right. And if we create a culture where kids aren't treating each other like crap,
yes,
then maybe we would have less of these things happen. That's true.
So this one paragraph, the entire article could just be that one paragraph, and I'd be okay with it.
Yeah.
He's talking about a solution that is a viable solution without actually talking about gun control.
Yes. He talks numerous times about the culture in the country, the culture of violence. But then he moves from that to focus on tools. I mean, if we focused on the problems in the culture, like this particular paragraph is talking about trying to create a culture of hospitality or whatever, or, countering the culture of violence, then those are things that we could all get behind and we could all work towards fixing. And those would actually address root causes, where focusing on a tool does nothing to address the problem and the causes of violence. Because we can be violent, as you look at the statistics, there's violence, there's gun violence, and then there's a whole world full of violence that doesn't involve guns. And it's just the focus on the tool that is infuriating to me. It's like every time they talk about gun violence, well, why are we focusing on people who are killed with guns? Why is it less tragic that somebody gets beaten to death or stabbed to death or set on fire? Why are those things less tragic just because a gun was involved?
Yeah, to take it in a different direction, it'd be like trying to solve the issue of drunk driving by focusing solely on the vehicle.
Yeah, exactly right. All right, this next heading makes absolutely no sense. I can only assume that this is a misprint. Is the 90% of Americans who want stricter gun violence a mob? What? I'm assuming that violence was supposed to be control or laws. The 90% of Americans who want stricter gun violence. I read through that last night and I was like, wait a minute. Something's not right with that. Oh, wait a minute. It's violence. He mixes the 90% statistic and then says 90% want gun violence, stricter gun violence.
But there's two things going on here. One is that, well, first of all, and I didn't even notice that the two times I read through this before we started to record, I didn't even catch that. So good for you. But it's 90% of Americans who say they are okay of gun control measures when the question is phrased in such a way that the person providing the poll gets their desired result.
Right. The questions are leading or misleading. So back to the article. Some Girardians, now, again, Rene Girard's fanboys are called Girardians, apparently, not to be confused with the residents of Lake Girardeau in Missouri.
That's the first thing that came to my mind.
Some Girardians claim that a large group of people who agree on anything is automatically a mob out for violence. But it's not always the case, says the author, that the mob wants to kill you. In fact, in his book Deceit, Desire, and the Novel, Girard talks about the character M. de Renal in Stendhal's book The Red and the Black. You have to be a complete egghead to know what all this is all about. M. de Renal believes in a lie. Girard says the whole world could come and tell the character the truth, and he still wouldn't believe it. In this case, the whole world is not a mob, but a community that tells the truth.
Yes, the responsible gun owners who keep trying to tell the anti-gun left that their statistics don't support their ideology.
Right, or that banning guns is not going to actually stop gun violence, or that it only affects the people who are not going to cause problems in the first place.
Yes. It's so funny because he doesn't realize that he is describing the anti-gun left as a mob, and he doesn't even realize it.
I know, exactly. I guess what he's trying to say here is the large group of people who do not support banning AR-15s, those people, that they're a mob. But the large group of people who want to ban them is a community that's telling the truth, is what he's trying to suggest.
I guess so. This is an example of a person trying to sound so smart that the end result is they sound like a moron.
Well, now we finally get to some scripture. Matthew 18 is another good example, he says, of a community that isn't a mob. Jesus teaches that if you have an issue with a member of the church, go talk to that member directly. If they won't listen, take another person and bring more people. If they continue to not listen, treat them as a Gentile until they do. His way of treating Gentiles wasn't to be violent with them, but as seen with the woman at the well and even Roman soldiers in Matthew 5, it's to love them, even if they may not be a member of the church. All right.
So much deception here.
Yeah, this starts with verse 15, right? Talking about the fellow Christian who sins against you.
Yes. And here he says, Jesus teaches that if you have an issue with a member of the church, where Jesus says, if your brother sins against you, there's a big difference between sin and differences of opinion. And the author, makes it sound like Jesus is talking about differences of opinion. So if you have an opinion different from that of the larger quote-unquote community, then the community is supposed to go to you and convince you that your opinion is wrong and their opinion is right. And they're supposed to keep doing this until you're convinced.
And then the scapegoat mechanism kicks in and they kick you out of the community or kill you, one or the other.
Yes. And okay. So, and here's the thing about Gentiles. Jesus says that for the one, and again, Jesus isn't talking about differences of opinion. He's talking about sin. Let's get that straight. Jesus says, if he refuses to listen, even to the church, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. The word there for Gentile is most often used to refer to pagan unbelievers. Okay. The times that Jesus is interacting with Gentiles in the Gospels, it refers to those Gentiles, those quote-unquote Gentiles, by their actual ethnicity. And, interestingly enough, when Jesus is interacting with these Gentiles, they're actually Gentiles who believe in him. Jesus doesn't say, treat these unrepentant sinners like the Gentiles that I have showed love to. No, that's not what he's saying. He says, treat them as you would an unrepentant sinner. And here's what's ironic. The anti-gun left, they're not really preaching love towards the pro-gun community, are they?
No, not at all. And so the analogy is basically, I mean, what he's trying to subtly suggest is that our difference of opinion on guns and our desire to keep them and to maintain our gun rights is a sin. You know, we've seen that sort of that suggestion in previous articles.
Yes,
he said we are the sinners in this analogy that America is the church in this analogy, and we gun-owning citizens, we're sinners because we won't support gun control. And since we won't listen, we're supposed to be treated like sinners and banished, I guess.
Yes. We're to be treated as a public pariah because we just won't agree with their opinions. I'm sorry, they're facts, they're truth.
Right.
I got that wrong. I have to correct myself.
Yes. They have access to the truth, you know. Matthew 18 also talks about our responsibility to children, says the author. If we put a stumbling block in front of them, it would be better for us to have a millstone wrapped around our necks and thrown into the ocean. These guns and the larger culture of violence, he'll sneak that in, is a stumbling block for our children.
Yes, I should have had a glass of scotch this morning. Okay, Jesus says, whoever receives one such child in my name receives me, but whoever causes one of these little children who believes in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a great millstone fastened around his neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea if he continues to support the personal ownership of swords. I just added that in just to point out the stupidity of that paragraph. Because Jesus is talking about faith and he's making it about gun control.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but once again, it's we gun owners leading children to sin by supporting gun rights is basically what he's suggesting here. And he's substituting that for the what Jesus is talking about, faith, and he's substituting support for gun rights.
Although there's another way to look at this. You have to use your imagination to, slightly pervert this. But, maybe, just maybe, the pro-gun community, such as you and I and our listeners, are responsible for the sins of these children because, gosh darn it, if we just didn't support the ownership of guns so much, they wouldn't be acting like a bunch of spoiled brats. See, I said you had to use your imagination for this one.
Right. I'm having a hard time.
So in a twisted way, we are responsible for David Hogg's profanity-laden rant.
Right. Well, in a way, that's true. I mean, the culture lauds that kind of behavior. I mean, the only reason that David Hogg gets out there and continues to spew that crap is because the culture, the media, the Hollywood elites think that's cool.
Yes.
He's speaking truth to power, and it doesn't matter how profanity-laden it is.
And he's young, and he's edgy, and so this is what's going to sell. So much of this is about money more than anything else, if you ask me.
Yeah. He's right about, again, he keeps talking about the larger culture of violence, but we're not, but if that's the problem, then why are we focusing so much on the guns? I mean, there is a culture problem. There's a societal problem that we've got to deal with. But guns, which are used for lawful purposes more often than they're used improperly, that's not the problem. Because look at the UK. Yes. They ban guns, violent crime goes up. They ban air rifles, violent crime continues to go up. Now they're asking people to turn their kitchen knives in because knife crime is off the charts. Now you've got people using acid to throw in people's faces when they attack them. So at some point, you run out of things to ban because the problem isn't the tool. The problem goes as far back as Cain and Abel.
Yes.
The next section is just a hoot. How not to scapegoat in the gun debate. Much of the gun debate centers around one side being over and against the other side. We can start to gain a sense of, quote, goodness by being in opposition to another. The sense of being good is a sign that we are scapegoating the other side. The real issue of gun violence falls away, and the issue becomes defeating our rival. That should not be the focus. The focus should be making our schools as safe as possible.
And I can agree with some of what he said here.
There's some sensible things here, yeah. Because both sides in the debate tend to demonize the other when we lose sight of the real problem. But we've been compromising on our side since 1934.
Mm-hmm.
But gun banners don't want to listen to anything reasonable that we suggest. This guy's argument about cars and guns, remember that, and how we've got to ban assault weapons. But they don't want to listen when we suggest that maybe bans aren't, banning a specific type of tool is not the answer. They don't want to listen to that. They want to listen to NRA members being called murderers and that we have blood on our hands. And instead of talking about the shooter or the sheriff's department or that idiot Sheriff Israel who still hasn't resigned or the school system, they're blaming you and me.
Yes. Well, let's call it what it is. The more violent that the left gets with the rhetoric, the more excited they become. But what is also the side effect is that their tribe is becoming smaller. And I do use the word tribe because it very much is a tribal mentality. That if you are a quote-unquote liberal and you stop and say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't quite adding up. This doesn't quite make sense.
Right, you get kicked out of the tribe.
Yes. Yes.
Well, and
you get treated just like that rapper of recent memory. If you dare to say, hey, maybe we should start thinking for ourselves.
Yes, exactly. And when you do that, like the Parkland kids did, come out and basically blame everybody that had nothing to do with this, it makes it hardens us on the other side against even wanting to talk. Because if your opening argument is you're a murderer, I don't really want to come talk to you and compromise with you.
Right.
So it doesn't help the debate or the discussion move forward if all you're going to do is scapegoat from the beginning. I mean, this guy doesn't even see it, but that's what the Parkland kids and everybody who's following them, that's what they've done from day one. And now we're supposed to be we're the ones who are scapegoating because we won't listen to them? That makes no sense.
Yes. They called Dana Lash a murderer on a CNN town hall that was broadcast nationwide.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody on the left that was there says a word.
Nope, because they all agree.
Yep.
In this sense, mimetic theory helps us understand that we often get caught up in scapegoating. You don't say, Skippy. Doing it for the entire article. As Girard claimed, remember that's Rene Girard, for those of you who are not fanboys, it's easy to see another person's scapegoat, but much more difficult to see my own. This is where we can help each other see our scapegoats, but we need a community, not a mob, to do this with each other. Do you think he's referring to the Parkland, the gun control supporters as a mob?
I don't know. I really don't know, because I could see how on one end, if you are on the anti-gun left and everything that is false suddenly makes sense to you, that you could see how the pro-gun community is scapegoating mental health.
We do have our favorite cliches, yeah.
Yes. You could see it how from a certain aspect that maybe he is talking about both sides with their scapegoats here, but looking at the article in its completion, I don't know, because he also says that, yes, we need to ban AR-15s.
Yeah, this...
scapegoating, hello.
Right. Yep. My sense is that the mob and the community in this particular paragraph and throughout this article, the mob is the gun rights supporters and the community are the people who are trying to speak truth to them.
Yes.
I think that's where he's going with it. I mean, so like you said, the only side I see scapegoating, and like you said, he does it from 4 paragraphs in, if it even lasts that long. The only side I see scapegoating is the anti-gun side. I mean, heavily. I mean, I know we like to say things like or point to mental health, but I don't see everybody on the anti-gun side or on the pro-gun side doing that. I see everyone on the anti-gun side blaming the guns.
Right. We do have a handful of people on the pro-gun side that have said some really stupid things.
Yeah.
Most of them have a last name that rhymes with LaPierre, but
Nugent.
Yes, Nugent. You have people that say some very dumb things, but it is such a small percentage of the pro-gun community. I'm using his word community. You like that? Mm-hmm. But on the anti-gun left, everybody wants to blame the gun.
Yep. Yep.
And everybody wants to blame the NRA and lawful gun owners. It's like that knucklehead you had down in New Mexico that was running for a congressional seat, where his entire ad says, F the NRA.
That's like the first sentence right out of his mouth.
Yes.
In that ad. And I thought, I didn't watch the video. I need to do that. But I thought I read that because of federal law, they can't edit that out. And he actually says the word.
Yes.
So they had to warn everyone before that video, that commercial plays. They have to run a warning. Hey, this contains objectionable language, and then they play the F-bomb on television. And because federal law protects it, the left gets away with it.
And you know what? I say let them, because the bigger the shovel they have, the deeper the hole they're digging themselves.
Yes. I'm just amazed by the stunning lack of self-awareness in this whole article. It's like he's talking about other people scapegoating and doesn't see it on the side that he supports at all, and makes the arguments, basically describing his side throughout this entire article. And we see the scapegoat mechanism, like you were talking about earlier. The scapegoat mechanism is in full swing on the anti-gun side. This idea that this is, if you remember from earlier, this is where you pick a person or a group to blame, and then you exclude them or kill them. And like you said, the girl who just graduated from Kent State, she gets all these death threats. We see businesses being threatened for supporting gun rights or refusing to take a side. Other businesses are being encouraged to cut ties with the NRA. And then, of course, the threats of violence against gun owners and gun rights advocates. And then the effort to make gun ownership and gun owners social pariahs like smokers.
Yes.
Remember? So what do you think? What are your final thoughts on this whole thing?
It's very deceptive again. And this is what we saw like with the last, when we did the second worst sermon. I forget which one it was. But it's very deceptive, because it's talking about, this language with Matthew 18, and Jesus says, if you have an issue with somebody, you go talk to them, and then you get the community involved. And then even if they don't agree with you, you got to treat them with love. And it makes it sound really good. And that's how the devil works with his deceptions. He's called the deceiver for a reason, because he makes that which is false look very appealing. Mm-hmm. And this article, if you have somebody who's still sitting on the fence, and I guess that's, the half dozen people left in America who are still sitting on the fence.
Right.
But if you're still sitting on the fence, I could see how this article would be very effective in swaying you. But it's just always look for the falsehood when something sounds too good to be true.
Right. All right.
This article is like the stripper talking about sexual morality, but
all right. Well, that's going to wrap it up. I think that covers it. Thank you, Pastor. I appreciate it.
You are very welcome. It was an enjoyable one.
And folks, if you have any questions about what you heard here today, any comments, any criticisms, be sure to visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. Leave us a voicemail or a voice message, or send us an email. We'd love to hear from you. Be sure to tune in next time for another edition of Clinging to God and Guns, right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
John Bennett is the pastor at St. John's Lutheran Church in Willow Creek, Minnesota. For more information, visit stjohnswillowcreek.org.
And that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. Thank you all for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. Thank you to our fine sponsors who make all this possible. Thank you to my awesome cast of contributors. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, for downloading, for subscribing. I hope you'll join us again next week. Until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Armed Lutheran Radio. For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. You can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher Radio, and TuneIn. This podcast is made possible by Cook's Holsters and contributions from listeners like you.